Muddy Waters was an American born guitarist who changed the sound of the blues in the city that loved him, and that was Chicago, which in turn he helped create the music that we now call rock and roll. Now, it's a couple of things about him that are unknown. One is his exact date of birth, and the other is where he was born. But there's a few things that are known. His real name is McKinley Morganfield, and he is a 6 time Grammy Award winner, a Lifetime Achievement Grammy Award winner, a Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, and a Blues Hall of Famer. And in 1994, he was honored with his likeness on a United States postage stamp. So let's get started on the musical journey of Muddy Waters. But first, I would like to welcome you all to the House of Nostalgia, where we talk about all things entertainment from our past. Muddy Waters was born sometime between the years of 1912 and 1916. Now, some say 1913. He always said in his interviews that he was born in 1915, but the census records say 1913 or 1914. You see what I mean? Just confusing. Honestly, he probably didn't even know. Now, we do know that he was born in Mississippi. Now, exactly which town is another mystery. Some say Jugg's Corner, others say Rolling Fork. But one thing that is known, he was raised on the Stovall Plantation in Clarksdale, Mississippi, with his grandmother after his mother died just a few years after his birth. He was an only child. Muddy got his famous nickname from his grandmother because he liked playing in the mud. He added Waters as he got older, which I felt was a pretty smart name combination. He was known for playing the guitar, but he actually started playing the harmonica at the age of 5. He didn't start playing the guitar until the age of 17, and he taught himself how to play both instruments. Muddy was born in the middle of the Delta, and these two instruments are what created the Delta sound. These are the two instruments that Robert Johnson played, and even though it wasn't a big difference in their ages, Robert's music was a big influence on Muddy, as well as other Delta blues performers from that era like Henry Son Sims, who was a fiddler, Son House, J.D. Short, and Charlie Patton, along with others from that time. In the 30s, Muddy started performing playing the harmonica with Big Joe Williams, who was a popular Delta blues guitarist. Now, another interesting thing is that Williams said he picked up a young Muddy in Rolling Fork, Mississippi. Now, what do you all think about that? Do you all think that's where he was born? It's still confusing to me. He was around the age of 15. He didn't record with Williams, but he did play the harmonica with him for a while. Williams passed away in 1982. Muddy worked as a sharecropper in the fields at a cotton plantation and worked at hole-in-the-wall clubs selling moonshine, and he would also perform. In 1941, he was one of the musicians to record blues for the Library of Congress. They were looking for Robert Johnson, but didn't know he had passed away 3 years earlier. Muddy was recorded again in 1943. These were Muddy's first recordings, and he was extremely proud of them. The recordings won a Grammy in the 90s. Listening to his recordings is what made him want to leave the South in search of a music career. Muddy decided to move from the South, and in 1943 he traveled to Chicago in search of becoming a professional musician. This was the second most important thing in his life at this point, besides recording for the Library of Congress. He went right to work when he got there, driving a truck, working in a paper mill, and playing in clubs at night. A year later, he purchased his first electric guitar. And this is what he was known for, you guys, livening up the blues and electrifying it. Big Bill Broonzy was a well-known Chicago blues performer, and Muddy and his electric guitar were making a name for himself, and he was asked to open for Broonzy. This gave Muddy a chance to perform for a larger crowd. In 1947, after just being in Chicago for 3 years, Muddy was starting to record for different record labels. The first label was OK Records. He recorded for them, but the songs weren't released. The same year, he recorded for blues producer J. Mayo Inc. Williams at Columbia Records, and these recordings were called race recordings. The Columbia recordings were released, but Muddy's name was not mentioned in these recordings. In 1947, next up was Aristocrat Records, which was run by the Chess Brothers. He recorded with blues pianist Sonny Land Sims, who actually hooked him up with Aristocrat Records. Their first few songs didn't even make it out of the studio, but they did record a couple of songs that became hits. I Can't Be Satisfied and I Feel Like Going Home. After the success of these two records, Leonard and Phil Chess changed Aristocrat Records to Chess Records. This was the start of Muddy's success. The Rolling Stones named their band after Muddy Waters' 1948 hit, Rolling Stone. Muddy was very busy in the late 1940s. He formed his own band, which included guitarist Jimmy Rogers, pianist Otis Spann, Elgar Edmondson on drums, and harmonica player Little Walter, who was still playing acoustic until 1952. That's when he electrified his instrument. Now, he was performing with his band, but Chess would not let him record with them until 1952. They recorded some of Muddy's biggest hits: Country Boy, I'm Ready, Hoochie Coochie Man, Got My Mojo Working, and Manish Boy. Muddy had a lot of hits, and he was a songwriter who wrote 67 songs. His classic hit, Hoochie Coochie Man, was written by Willie Dixon. A lot of musicians came and went in his band, but one time a young Buddy Guy played, as well as James Cotton and Junior Wells. Muddy got a chance to see the world while opening up his music to different cultures. A lot of the audience wasn't ready for his electrified sound. Folk music was still favored in Europe, but the performing acts saw this as the future. It was like he was teaching them about music. Muddy was one of the first to record a blues live album called At Newport 1960 at the Newport Jazz Festival. He performed at the American Folk Festival in 1963. He recorded his own folk album in 1964, Muddy Waters Folk Singer. This album was critically acclaimed, but it wasn't received well by his audience. Muddy's career was starting to turn a little cold. Music was changing, R&B started to take over, psychedelic music was becoming hot, and rock and roll was getting revamped. The British music invasion was taking the US by storm. These were the performers who looked up to the blues artists of the 40s and 50s. Well, Europe had a change of heart when it came to Muddy's electrified sound. They were ready this time around, and Chess Records was doing their best to keep up with the changes in music. Muddy performed all through the 60s, and he was able to perform and watch the change in music that he helped create, which was rock and roll. He recorded his last album, Muddy Waters Woodstock, and left Chess Records in 1975 and signed with Blue Sky Label Records. He sued Chess Records for royalties. It was a big fight that was pursued about his royalties up until this year, and I don't feel that it was really solved. In 1978, close to his retirement, Martin Scorsese released a film called The Last Waltz, which was the last performance with his band. Muddy had the career that most artists dream of. He performed for over 30 years and gave other well-known musicians their start. Muddy Waters passed away on April the 30th, 1983 from heart failure at his home in Westmont, Illinois. After his death, there were a lot of tributes to him around the Chicago area. They were doing this up until 2 years after his death. As we all know, a movie was made about Chess Records and all of their Hall of Fame artists called Cadillac Records. I consider it a classic. Thank you guys for watching the video on Mr. Muddy Waters.